Yo, 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 welcome to another edition of Roundball Ramble. I'm your host, Corban Ford. Follow me on Twitter at CorbanNBA. This is a Sports Ethos presentation, so check out Sports Ethos on Twitter at Sports Ethos Online, sportsethos.com. SportsEthos. That's how you spell it, in case you were wondering. Today, I have a special guest, really excited to talk some off-season superlatives, which, you know, it's the off-season. It's time to get all the wackiness out the way. But this guest is a serious one. You can find him on Twitter at bball_is_poetry, all one word, pretty simple. Shouldn't have to spell that out. bball_is_poetry. He is one of the leaders of basketball intelligence. He has his own website at basketballpoetry.com. His name is Mike Shearer. Mike,
Hello.
How are you doing, sir?
Oh, I am great. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and excited to talk some NBA offseason stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy you could join. It's been a minute. I'm very excited. And yeah, off season. I mean, at this point, we're in the dog days. Excuse me. Officially the dog days of the off season, where it's old games and like early previews and too soon. If you have to say too soon for anything at this point, yeah, you're most definitely right. But I think we take this time to take a quick look back. It's been closer to the end of the off season than it is to the beginning of the new season. So wanted to do some fun little. Actually, I don't know if that's actually mathematically correct. I'm pretty sure it is. That's safe. Yeah, mathematically, it's been like a month. So I'm right. Anyway, wanted to ask just like some fun questions to look back on the offseason it was. That was really weird. It wasn't as much fireworks as we expected. Although there was a decent amount of movement, there still is a lot more yet to play out. But the likelihood of that happening today, I mean, knock on all the wood, that'd be crazy. But it's probably not. So that being said, I thought, hey, let's just look back on some of the things that happened and talk about them. So one though, going back even before free agency, going to the draft. I know we weren't like all of us weren't super mega like, okay, we're scouting everything on the draft, months in advance. But obviously, you do a lot of basketball work, so I'm sure you have I'm sure you definitely have a good basketball intel on the prospects coming in. So I want to ask you, when you watched the draft and you saw the players selected, was there one player that you're like, you know what? This fits the category that I'm about to announce as best draft team or player fit?
Yeah, I think let's leave aside Wembanyama, right? Like, I think that's probably a pretty good player team fit. And frankly, I don't know about you, but I'm just tired of talking about Wembanyama.
I'm actually with you on that. Yes, you said it. That's me.
Even though I just said that, I'm still going to, in fact, go with a blue chip prospect. I'm just going to say Scoot and the Blazers. You could argue that the selecting of Scoot Henderson for Portland was, in fact, the reason why Damian Lillard left, as opposed to the Trailblazers trying to trade the pick, right? But if we assume that they anticipated Lillard demanding out, I think a dynamic point guard like Scoot is exactly what that Blazers roster is going to need. He's going to be a foundational building block for them in the future. Already, like, just seeing him in Summer League and watching some tape of him from, the Ignite and some Ignite games last year, you see a guy who has a veteran's ability to control the speed of the game. Incredible change of pace guy. Obviously, an explosive first step. The jumper looks better, I think. It's improving. The biggest question with him is he going to be able to harness that athleticism to really get to the rack as often as I'd like him to? He tends to settle a little bit for the mid-range, which is something that can be coached up, I think. And once he kind of fully realizes that his athleticism is going to translate to the NBA, as well as I think it will, it's going to be impossible to keep him away from the cup. So it would be my nomination. What about you?
Honestly, I'm with you on Scoot. I think that was, it was the easiest selection of draft night in my mind because, you're sitting there and you had two guys who obviously, I don't know how much credence you lend to the argument that either Scoot or Wemby or Scoot would be a number one pick in any draft. I did like a quick exercise going back to a few drafts. There was a few I was like, possibly, you know what I mean? But either way, like that was probably one of the easiest decisions and the easy decisions for the draft. Aside from that, I was really a fan of Anthony Black going to the Magic. Now, I like that because of the length, athleticism he brings, the fact that he is like a point guard that I think is not. It's damning with faint praise. Like, I don't look at him as like a real scoring threat. So like Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner will be able to get all the touches still, but I look at someone who can defensively be a terror and like offensively like kind of push the tempo and get everything going. The problem is you still have a guy similar to that in Markelle Fultz, which I don't know how that resolves itself. I don't think those two can play together in the backcourt. Like, there's not enough collective shooting. It'll just put Paolo and Franz in a stranglehold, you know, especially if it's Wendell Carter Jr. as well. Like, that just won't be great. But, like, for the future, I mean, I'm of the mindset that Markelle Fultz has definitely had a resurgence in Orlando. I definitely think he can continue his career somewhere else. And if you're taking Black, I think you're looking future focused. And so I like Anthony Black for the next, like, 5-6 years, per se, for the Magic.
Oh, I think it's funny that you picked Black because I actually had him as one of my nominees for the next category we were going to talk about, which is most confusing fit.
Well, no, let's get into that now because I can see why. Like, I'm not naive as to why, but I want to get your reasoning for sure.
Yeah, so I followed along with everything you were saying about Black and agree with all of the words. I just came to a different conclusion, which is simply like, at some point, you have to stop drafting guys who can't shoot. Like, you just have to at some point, right? Like, this is where I think you can have really interesting philosophical discussions about best available player versus drafting for fit, because I'm a believer in best available player at the top of the draft. But like at 6, I think it starts to become a little murkier, particularly when you already have 2, top draft choices that are still developing as shooters in Wagner and Banchero. And I think, Franz is obviously a good shooter at this point. He is not a knockdown. He's not Nowitzki out there. He's not even Markkanen out there yet, right? And if you feel like the future of the Magic is going to be putting the ball in Banchero and Wagner's hands and letting them do a lot of the playmaking from the wing, I struggle to see exactly where Black is going to fit in as a guy who's best on the ball right now. And like, I think he has shown the ability to be a threat on the move off the ball, but he's not a threat to catch and space the floor, right? And smart players can maximize spacing even without shooting. And I think the Magic have a lot of smart players, but there's only a limit to how much you can expand the floor if there's just not any shooting out there. And as to your point, like Fultz is already going to command a lot of the minutes at point guard, and he's not an outside threat right now. So it's crazy to say that their best shooter at this point, is going to be either Wagner or Wendell Carter probably. And that leaves me concerned about, like, somebody has to move somewhere on this Magic team. And I like all the pieces a lot. Like, I love Black as a player in a vacuum. This rotation is going to be a struggle to watch on offense yet again, I think. And it's kind of going to hinder the development of their young guys at some point if like they're just constantly driving into bodies and the outlet passes aren't able to do anything, right? So I don't know. I don't love the fit, but none of the top guys this year could shoot in the draft. None of them were good shooters. And I think to the Magic, I'm like criticizing the pick a little bit, but also I'm like not sure where else they would go. They did get Jet Howard just a few picks later, which will help in some regard. But it was kind of an interesting thing, and I was talking about this with Adam Spinella from the Box and One a little bit about how none of the top guys in this draft really were known for being accurate from deep, which is going to change the team building philosophies of the teams that invest such a high draft pick in these guys.
I definitely agree with you. I think in that way, like if you're putting them on, they're going to have to be your primary guys, like on ball, just because the value they bring off ball, as good as they are on it, probably isn't nearly as even, So I agree with you there. And honestly, Jet Howard is one I have on my most confusing. Well, we'll talk about it in a second. Only because it fits a clear. We'll talk about it in a second. So I'm gonna get there. I'm ready to jump on it. But I want to ask again. To kind of add to that initial question, were there any other player fits or team fits that you liked from the draft?
That I liked. So actually, I thought that
you thought were like a good fit. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that a lot of them made sense to me later on in the draft. Like I think outside of the top 10 or so, like I understood the reasoning behind most of the draft picks. One to watch that wasn't actually on my radar, I would say at the time, but it's starting to turn my head a little bit is the Jazz's Keontae George, who had a pretty incredible summer league, showed off. I think he showed up like 15 or 20 pounds lighter than he was in college. And it made a noticeable difference, right, in his burst. And the Jazz do need some like dynamic playmaking on the perimeter. I think that their front court, and I do want to talk more about the Jazz's front court later on, but I think in the back court, it will be interesting for them to have a guy who can kind of just like zip around, showed off like a nice playmaking, passing ability that hadn't always been present, I think, in college. So it's rare to see a guy who comes in and completely subverts expectations for what people think they know about a player this quick into Summer League, right? And Summer League is not a place you go to evaluate guys based all the way on the results, but it is a place you want to see how does a prospect play? Like, what are their tendencies? What are they trying to do? And I was surprised based on what I had heard about George. Not a guy I knew much about when he was drafted, but based on what I'd read and what I'd heard about him, I was very pleasantly surprised with how he operated in Summer League, and it looked like a great fit for Utah.
It most definitely did. And I know I'm still like improving my draft process and just kind of how I evaluate players and my own board, relative consensus and everything. But I had Keontae very high. Just because I thought, yes, he had a lot of room to play with the ball and made some mistakes and wasn't always efficient and, all of that. But at the same time, I liked his positional size. I like the fact that he showcased it more in Summer League, that he was a guy who could score, but also could kind of man the offense, whether it's a second side initiator, whether it's that's
right,
a playmaking guard. Like I definitely could see him being one of those players in the future, and he showed really good flashes of that in Utah. So it validated in a very small extent because again, this is like you said, Summer League. But I'd rather you show it in Summer League than don't.
Exactly.
And I'm sure we have guys to talk about in that vein later. But yeah, I definitely agree with you there, especially when you're looking for. I mean, you still have a different backcourt in Utah, right? Colin Sexton's still around there. Obviously, you still have a 6 man of the year candidate, Jordan Clarkson, but he's out there. These guards there's not like, I don't think moving forward, the future for them is more like you mentioned in the front court. I think they're still trying to figure out that guard depth. I think Clarkson is a 6 man moving forward. It's fine. I don't know where Sexton fits in kind of moving forward. Who knows on that? Like, I think they're just weird there. And honestly, the Jazz are interesting to me because I have no idea, as an aside, on just like where they're going next year. Like, I don't think they're trying to win, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, that roster is it's weird. It's weird. That's why I know they're going to be at the bottom just by osmosis, I feel. But I was just curious. But like Taylor Horton-Tucker's still there, the guard spot. Don't forget Ochai Agbaji. Like, there are a few guys that kind of sort themselves out, but definitely the backcourt is where there's room for sure. And I think Keontae, just by the way he played in Summer League, he's going to get a ton of run.
Yeah, I mean, just harping on Utah for a second, like I do think like they're not going to try to win, but they might win anyway. I think last year's first half obviously tailed off, but it did show sort of the ceiling that this team can have, and I'd expect them probably to be better this year than they were last year. I don't think they're as bad as they were at the end of last year. I don't think they were as good as they were at the start of last year, but like, if they can stay healthy, I could see them ending up in a play-in spot pretty easily if a few other teams just fall off. And dude, Sexton is such a weird player. Every year he puts out these insane, like, I feel like he's always putting up these insane shooting splits. He's like a 50, 40, 90 candidate, all the time. And yet I never feel like he's making a positive impact on the game. He's one of those guys who like makes really mean faces and he looks like he's doing so much stuff on defense. And then you realize he's never doing the right thing. And I don't know. There's clear talent there. I just don't know that it's going to help the Jazz win, which to your point, maybe that's not their goal. Maybe they just want to ride it out and see if he can develop.
Just see what happens. You're right. I definitely kind of agree with you there. And they're going to be one of the teams that's going to be intriguing to watch for sure. And then another guy toward the end of the end of the first round that I also liked, kind of just staying with the Jazz, Bryce Sensabaugh. A guy who we know, I mean, I put some comparisons and like he reminded me, and I watch a lot of old school ball, but sometimes my comparisons are fuzzy. Like the way he plays, like this kind of, and this guy I'm about to compare him to is a little bit bigger, but like undersized player relative, but likes to play out the post, can really do a little bit of scoring, better off the dribble or better like with the ball in his hands than like a spot shooter, but definitely a guy who could heat up. He reminds me like a Jamal Mashburn. Like I like the way he's like able to like play out the post, his stocky kind of build, like the way he lives in that mid-range area, can stretch it out. Doesn't always do that, but like the potential is really there to do so. Whether or not he feels comfortable is another story. But I like him in Utah, where again, like his role is simple. Like if he plays defense and earns his minutes on the floor, it'll be great. But like if you bring him out there, like he's gonna get buckets. And I have an affinity to guys that do that.
Yeah, I mean, shooting is always going to have value, right? And especially at the point he was drafted, it feels like the Jazz. I don't really know why he was sliding, because at one point he was projected to be a much higher pick. And then by the time the draft rolled around, there were fears he might even fall to the second round, I remember. So I'm not 100% sure what happened there. But I think where the Jazz got him, there's a lot of value. And that team is definitely, every team, but especially the Jazz, are always going to need to find shooting in as many places as they can. So absolutely a good choice there. I bet nobody expected to be talking about the Jazz this much this early on in the pod, right? But here we are.
Here we are. This is what we do. It's different down here. But and I got one more player I just want to throw out there just to get your take on, because we're gonna probably talk about them next in the next category. I like the selection of Nick Smith Jr. I thought that as a combo guard, and mind you, the Hornets have drafted quite a few of these guys. that have not yet panned out, whether we're looking at James Bouknight or, I mean, Bryce McGowan's in the second round, but a guy like him, going back a little further, Malik Monk didn't take off in Charlotte. Like these combo guards that can maybe do a little something, kind of the same physical profile, definitely looking for the shot first and foremost, and aren't always the most efficient. Pour one out for Bouknight because that doesn't look great. But I definitely thought that for someone that I had, again, high in my board going into the college season, he played with injury, and I thought that was actually admirable, even though it did hurt his draft stock. And there's some real weaknesses. He's kind of a light dude. He does seem to avoid contact. He's a very good floater, but he doesn't seem to really embrace the contact. Playing through injury didn't showcase his strengths. And defensively, not great. But I thought that in the environment he's in Charlotte, where depending on how you feel about Terry Rozier, like, are you going to do the Toronto route and just keep your guys till well past their trade value and then they just walk? You know what I mean? Or you're just going to keep them until they gradually decline. Like, Terry Rozier is a solid player, but he's been on the trade block. Like, he's been available for contending teams for a couple. He's been linked to the Suns for the last 2 years, and you feel he gets something back, if anything back. And at this point, I feel like the ship's starting to sail. He's definitely reaching his he'll be 30 this upcoming year. Like, I'm not saying that Nick Smith Jr. is going to be the shooting guard of the future, but also this team right now, we'll talk about them, like, who knows where they're at right now. So there's a chance, and Nick Smith definitely has the potential to do so. So I thought, why not? Take a swing in the second round with the play with good upside, really came in high in consensus rankings, and just go for it.
Yep, I agree with that pretty much 100%. Like, I think that Nick Smith, particularly where he was drafted, has the upside of like a top 10 pick traditionally, right? And playing hurt is interesting. I've been thinking about it a lot recently in regards to like Domantas Sabonis, right? Where he was playing with, a fractured thumb for most of last season, which really dragged him down in the playoffs. And I think it exposes players to so much criticism. You'd rather have an injured Smith or an injured Sabonis out there than on the bench, because they're still probably better than who's behind them. But it does just do so much to change the perception of you, particularly for college guys like Smith, where like there isn't a large body of work for most people to rely upon. You might have, in general, not in Smith's case, but you might have 1 or 2 years prior, or maybe you have some AAU mixtapes where people are, have this idea. But I do wonder if Smith would have been better off just not playing, right? Like, for a guy who had as much hype coming into college as he did, I don't know. That's everything you said about him as a player. I should probably drag this back on track, but everything you said about him as a player is I agree with, and a good pick for the Hornets just to see what they have. I'm not as high on this player archetype as you, I think, but the ones that hit obviously can always, like, combo guards, scoring guards are always an asset to the team if they hit. I just think so often it turns into guys who can hamper the offense a little bit. And we saw that in Summer League with Smith, where he was, the nights where he was on, obviously it looked great. I think he had a 30-point night in one time. And then the nights where he was chucking and, trying to recapture the magic or trying to prove himself, I think you can just feel the offense dying as a slow death. And so it's tough for me to get over that sometimes.
No, I agree with you. And I'm a graduate of Monte Ellis University, so I think it is hard for me to not go back to my roots there. But no, you're right. When it hits, but more often than not, it doesn't. And when it doesn't, like, you see the Bouknights. But yeah, let's kind of go to our next category, which is basically opposite. What was the most confusing and or annoying draft fit that you had?
So we already talked about Anthony Black, which is, where I was. And then I have 2 more for you, but I'll give one and then I'll let you go. So quickly, because we've already talked about Utah a lot, but Taylor Hendricks on Utah, I liked that pick a lot when they made it. And then they immediately went and traded for John Collins, which then confused me because that's suddenly a very crowded front court, right? Like, you've got Markkanen, who's going to eat up a lot of minutes at the 3 and at the 4. You've got Kessler, obviously, manning the 5. You've got Collins now. You have Kelly Olynyk, who's still a very good player. Like, he's going to get minutes, even if he's not the sexiest name. Like, he's a good player, and that team kind of needs his playmaking from that spot, I think. They signed Yurtseven recently, who I have been a big fan of in Miami, and I think he's going to, at least compete for the backup 5 minutes. They still have Fontecchio if they need like a shooting 4. So, like, I don't know. I like Hendricks a lot as a player. It's the exact kind of player archetype that every team wants eventually, like a 3-and-D guy with some defensive flexibility. But it's with the addition of Collins, I think he's going to be really squeezed for playing time now.
I agree. I think he's one of those guys, you make a draft selection, you go, great. And then you see the free agency fit and you go, why? We've seen that in teams time and time again. And he's one of those guys because you're right. He does bring some intriguing talent. Like, I almost feel like maybe because of his physical profile, but he almost reminds me like a better shooting like Jonathan Isaac kind of in the way he's able to at least play offensively, right? And the wiry kind of long. He's an Orlando Magic pick usually, like over the last couple of years. And so Utah, it's like, why not? A younger guy playing alongside Lowry, like let's see how that fits. Now you have John Collins there. Are you putting Hendricks at 3? I don't think you really should. Doesn't look great. You're kind of pigeonholing the guy there if you do. Very much how the Cavs pigeonholed Markin into the 3 when he played there, which was funny. So, he's coming off the bench probably more than likely, but it's like, why would you do that? Especially when John Collins is still like, 26? Like, he's not an older guy. Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't utilized in my mind most effectively in Atlanta. So, like, you can definitely envision him, there's more to unlock. But how you gonna do that when you have a younger player waiting in the wings? It's very much like I don't even know. It's like, I can't even bring up another comparison because even Capella's older than Onyeka Okongwu in Atlanta, but similar to that. Like, the guy's not going anywhere. And this guy, you're going to be paying soon, making him very expensive, and it's probably going to intersect. So, yeah, that's definitely when it's interesting. I had Jett Howard, and I know it's interesting because I just feel like you had a system where you had, in my mind, you want shooting, right? We were just talking about the fact that the Magic needed shooting. And I feel that you had 3 really good shooters there, Jett Howard, Grady Dick, and Jordan Hawkins. And if I had to rank them, I would probably put Howard second. Grady shot really well from 3, but it wasn't like the type of difficult threes and off of movement and all that other stuff, right? I would put Jordan Hawkins first on that. I think that he did a really good job of shooting different types of threes, but also he had a little burst at the rim. Also, he did a little bit in between. Like, it wasn't just shooting. And defensively, not super great, but I thought the effort was there. With Jett, I don't know. Like, Jett is a very good shooter, but he is nowhere near an elite athlete. Now, he has size, but I also feel like defensively, he's a positionless defender. And I don't mean that in a good way. Like, he doesn't seem strong enough to guard like bigger guys. You're not really playing him up a position. You put him on a shorter position, he's going to get smoked. He's not very quick. He's going to be targeted. Like, I don't think that's great. And also, like, if he's not an off-ball player, I don't like what he does on the ball. Like, he's a little bit of an in-between game, but he's not really great finishing at the rim. He struggles turning the corner. I just feel like, okay, you're a guy that, okay, if Paulo or Franz or let's say Markelle Fultz get to the basket and create an opening and swing action and you have a wide open shot, yes, Jett Howard, go for it, great. But if it's okay, give the ball to Jett Howard. Oh, pump fake, okay, still there. What are we gonna do? We're gonna swing it right back out. Like, I just don't really. I think you had a easy pick for shooters and you picked one of the worst in terms of any value utility they add aside from just shooting. And so that was my mind. I also thought like he also played a little bit through injury, and maybe that's why he dropped a little bit as well. I know he had some ankle injuries in Michigan, but that's where I had him. I had him more in like the back half of the lottery, like 17, 18. Well, not back half of the lottery, back half of the first round rather. And so to get him where he was, like, yes, he's a very good shot maker. I think it fits well roster building wise, but I don't think he's gonna be a primary creation hub. I don't think he put pressure at the rim. And yeah, that kind of worries me.
Yeah, my counterpoints to that would be like, one, I don't think he needs to be a primary creation hub. I don't think that's ever going to be his role, at least on the Magic, where they already have so many plus positional creators, right? Like I think Banchero, Wagner, Fultz are all at least above average for their position at kind of like playmaking and stuff like that. I do think Howard, the one thing you didn't say that I think is valid is that he's a decent passer, I think. He's not necessarily like a dribble drive on his own kind of guy, but I think that, at least in Summer League, he had a couple of really nice passes that kind of got the crowd going, ooh, and stuff. I think that he does have a little bit of vision there, which will help. So yeah, we'll see. I don't know as much maybe about why they chose Howard over the other shooters there, but I think that to me, at least the pick seemed defensible at number 11 when your clearest need was shooting. And I think they found a guy that they expect it to translate. And I don't think they're as worried about the creation and the offensive hub type stuff right now.
No, I'm with you. I don't think it was more confusing as much as annoying for me. Like, you got shooting. That's probably where it fits. Like, you got shooting. I would have wanted more, but you're right. You don't need it per se with the guys you have. It would have been helpful, especially if there are changes.
It's always helpful.
You know, so yeah, and I thought that there was that similar talent on the board. But with that, I'm gonna throw it to you. Do you have another pick that you're like, why?
My last one, and this is actually going to be a somewhat similar story to when we were talking about Anthony Black. This is a player that I love. I just don't love him for this team, and that's Asar Thompson. So I am the biggest fans of the Thompson twins. Like, I think they're going to be so good. I'm so impressed with what I saw from them in Summer League, particularly on defense, which I think a lot of people have question marks about just given the level of competition they were playing, at OTE. I was very impressed with the defensive playmaking instincts that both the twins showed. But going back to the best available player fit, I do think Thompson probably was the best available player, in my opinion, at number 5. A lot of people would disagree with that. So I understand why the Pistons took him. But now you have 3 guys on the Pistons roster who are young, who need reps on the ball to be effective. And none of them are particularly great off ball in Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Cade Cunningham. Everyone tells me that Cade Cunningham is going to be a great shooter. I would love to see him make a shot one time. A single 3-pointer would be superb for me, because right now I see a guy who's shooting, I think, sub 30% from 3 for his, albeit very brief career. And it sure looks good, but you start to get worried that at some point that it's not going to translate. And he's also the best on-ball guy, in my opinion, in terms of like passing and creating offense for others. Ivy and Thompson and Cunningham is just going to be a weird position for new coach Monty Williams to try to figure out like who gets the on-ball reps and where. I think Thompson is a good cutter. I think he will have good instincts in that regard. I'm not sure that I think he's probably going to be the worst of the 3 shooting wise to start. Ivy's 3-pointer is not great, but at least he can make it on occasion, but he also is best when he's got the ball and he's pulling off some Tyrese Maxey stuff where he's like going straight to the rim hard, right? Like when he's decisive with it. And Cade is probably their best spacer theoretically, but he's also the best passer. So I just don't know why. I don't know how Thompson is going to fit into a Pistons team that already had 2 guys that kind of fill the role that I'd like to see Thompson play. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of with you on that. I definitely think that again, it goes back to the BPA on, and fit, right? Like, I definitely think he was the best player available there. And that's saying a lot, because I'm not really high on the Thompson twins. I love their athleticism. I love their playmaking ability, defensive upside. The lack of shooting, and I definitely skew more that way in my own draft philosophy, but it bugs me, even though I guess you do have arguably the better shooter of the 2. But with that being said, I think that you don't have, a lot of guys want the ball. Or a lot of guys, rather, don't even say want the ball. They kind of need the ball to be at their most effective, right? Like, say what you will about Jaden Ivey being, a better shooter. Like, he's best with ball in the 10s. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, same thing with Cade. Any weaknesses we saw when Cade came out in that 2021 draft, like, people talk about, wow, really good, easy number 1, yada, yada. But his shooting could improve. Well, 2 years later, I don't think that's changed, right? So that's another thing, right? And then, of course, Asar. Really good player. Like, maybe more of a wing guy. But still, like, better with the ball in his hands, and he's not going to be like a spot up. He's not playing the Jett Howard role, right? So those are 3 guys, all of which are sub shooters at their position. Like, they all can maybe shoot, possibly, depending on how you feel about them, but definitely relative to their positional peers are below standard, right? And then you have Marvin Bagley, Jalen Duren, James Wiseman. Like, you are getting nothing. I'm thinking of, what's his name?
Big Stu.
Big Stu, who I didn't even like that contract. We'll talk about that, I guess, at some point. But like Isaiah Livers, like, for 3-point shooting, probably like your only actual shooter that you go, okay, great. Like, yeah, Stu will get him up, but he's one of those guys that he gets him up. I don't know if his numbers aren't super bad, but I don't look at him and go, oh, watch out, close out hard. You know what I mean? So I agree with you. I think that, yes, for the fit, not great. For the best player available, okay, but now you have to make a decision, like, okay, how are you going to have the creative offense to utilize all 3 of these guys in a way that brings out, if not the best, something close to that, to make them all work together in one uniform, symphony of players, right? And that goes back to the coaching. I'm not high on Monty Williams. I think that behind the scenes, locker room wise, he did not do a good job in Phoenix.
Especially for a guy who's supposed to have the touch with players, right?
There
sure were a lot of very publicly disgruntled players, which is pretty unusual.
Exactly. So whether you're going from a journeyman like Jay Crowder to a former number 1 pick like DeAndre Ayton, there was issues. And this is for a team that was contending, that's trying to win, like actual championships, right? So you go from that, and now you have a team that you have guys who are going to be up for the next contract soon. Like, it's already been, 2 years for Cade, right? Jaden last year, Thompson this year. All 3 of those guys all kind of need the ball, all in similar backcourt kind of positions. You have James Wiseman, Jalen Duren, and of course Marvin Bagley all up in there. Like, you have a glut of positional battles from young guys who you have to put down their ego, try to make them work together to win. And you're going to go to Monty Williams, who one of those boxes were checked. I just don't know. So no, going back to that, kind of straight off, but I was okay with it when I saw him play a little bit. But long term, I'm not optimistic of the fit there. I think that one of those guys needs to be moved. There has to be some kind of consolidation trade. I forgot about Bojan Bogdanovic. So I guess you have a shooter there. My bad.
And Joe Harris, maybe, although I doubt he sees too much time. But yeah,
I think between injuries and defensive, between injuries and defensive issues, you're right. And you're right. That's it. Like, that's all, folks. And 3 shooters on a 12-man, 15-man roster. So yeah, I agree with you on that. I think my last kind of pick, Bilal Coulibaly. I definitely, he rose up draft boards over the last couple weeks. I think he brings some intriguing, he could be anything, like the mystery box. And I'll admit, I'm partial to the mystery box in life and in basketball. Oh, he could be anything, that's intriguing. But when you're a team like the Wizards, he could be anything is okay, I guess. But, you could also just go with a guy who probably makes a better fit in my mind, a better, or let's say more better defined pick, like a more defined fit. I would have liked Anthony Black there. I mean, Anthony Black was already gone, but that would have been nice. Or you could have traded. Well, they traded. So I think they traded back for who they trade with. I forgot the pick they traded. Did they trade with the Pacers? They traded with the Pacers. That's what it was. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I guess you could argue who that player would be. But Bilal, to me, I mean, his numbers, 6'6", good wingspan, kind of a guard, kind of a forward, but the dude averaged 5 points a game. And when I say that, I mean, I'm not saying his weaknesses to me is what is he offensively? He had a good game in preseason. I think in the game where he had 19 points, 4 rebounds, 4 blocks, 3 assists, and he was 5 out of 10 shooting, 8 out of 9 from the free throw line. When he's a little bit of everything, that's cool. That Swiss Army knife type player is great. I just don't know if that is his long-term outcome. Offensively, his 3-point percentage was on such small volume, and his shooting's iffy to begin with. Again, there's potential there. I just don't think he's that can't miss. We got to grab him right there that the Wizards ultimately went with, especially given where they are right now in their team trajectory.
Yep, I completely agree. I'm just not a fan of it's pretty rare that you see guys who rocket up the draft boards this late in the process, and then they end up being a success for where they're picked, right? I think a lot of the time these stories, and I think the opposite is true with guys who take major slides. I think a lot of the time they tend up overperforming based on where they end up. And these things kind of gain momentum on their own. And I do believe that the front offices and things like that believe maybe too much sometimes in the collective wisdom of the masses at the expense of their own intelligence, right? And clearly the Wizards believe in Coulibaly because they went up and grabbed him, right? They didn't wait for him to come to him. But I don't really see where he's going to fit on a team that he's never going to be given the opportunity to kind of get the ball and do the things that he's best at right now. So unless he turns himself into a completely different player than we've seen up to this point, which he could, he's just so young and so raw, maybe he could totally develop into some kind of off-ball killer. But on a team that's already got a lot of guys who want the ball, and this is going back to what we said about the Pistons, right? A lot of guys who need the ball to be at their best in Poole and Kuzma, and to a lesser extent, Johnny Davis actually had a reasonable summer league. So maybe he's still not dead on arrival yet. He's just not Coulibaly's just not going to get the opportunity to develop as much as I think he would have if he had just fallen to a different team later on that then could carve out a specific role for him, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you there. And it's interesting. I think there's going to be something. I mean, we have the time to look back and kind of see, these players, these project type players drafted really early and where they ended up long-term compared to where they started. You know what I mean? That is some interesting side project to go with, but we can go on for this probably another 20 minutes. But let's go to the next category, which is for us, I guess the best sleeper pick. Sure. A pick that you're you know what? I'm not mad at it. That whether you saw it in summer league or just have a really strong feeling about it, that could look good moving forward. Yeah,
for me, I have one guy here, and it's Hunter Tyson on the Nuggets. I saw, I think, 3 of his games in summer league in person, and the shooting was lights out. He was 18 for 36 from deep, I think, in his 5 games. He was rebounding really well. He held up all right on defense. But the funny part that maybe you couldn't necessarily see, if you were watching on TV, is this dude is just crazy jacked up every time he does something good. And it's really fun. He's just like constantly like fist pumping the air and like slapping the basket stanchion. And like, he's like the biggest cheerleader on the bench. He's just losing his mind all the time over like basic layups. And it cracks me up. I think Mike Malone is not a guy who traditionally has loved rookies, but as we saw with Christian Brown recently, and even Michael Porter Jr. to an extent in the past, like he's starting to, I think, open up to the idea that, hey, maybe rookies can contribute late in the season. And the Nuggets are interesting. Because they lost, several of their bench pieces. Pretty much anybody who can shoot on that team is a starter. They don't really have much 3-point making ability on their bench. And so I do wonder if there's a role for Tyson, whether it's backing up Michael Porter Jr. at the 3 or getting some minutes at the 4. I think there might be some room for him to come in as a little bit of an offensive engine for the second unit, just to space the floor and make some catch and shoot threes. So that would be, to me, particularly as a second rounder, a guy who looks like he's going to leave Mike Malone with no choice but to find him some minutes. And I think that's exciting.
That is, especially when you have a player, like you said, that can make, whether it's opportunity that they create, opportunities open up for them, a little bit of both, like it, boom. Like that's really neat. So definitely with you on that. I only have one as well. And that is Dariq Whitehead. Really high on Dariq going in, obviously battling foot injury, continued foot injuries throughout college and even after. But I thought it was cool that he was operated for that second foot when he had after the season, basically by the doctor in the new Brooklyn Nets organization. So if anyone knows like the recovery of that, like he would, right? And also Dariq, when he played, showed some more defense than I was expecting. Brings a good positional size and body type to position, really shot the 3 at a high clip. And let's not forget, in high school, he really showed some self-creation as a possible offensive hub or something similar to that. So not saying that he will be that in Brooklyn, but that there definitely is potential for that to happen. And you're in a position where, I mean, Brooklyn's kind of a team sort of in transition. Like, they can definitely win with some of their win-now players. If you look at a guy like Mikal Bridges, re-signing Cam Johnson, Spencer Dinwiddie, you have these other guys there. You also have younger guys, whether it's, Cam Thomas, whether it's Nick Claxton, Noah Clowney, like you're in a weird space, right? But I think that there is a role, especially the wing position, shooting guard, wing, swingman position, for Dariq Whitehead to really get healthy, so he can, shoot the ball at a high clip and find us one on the floor as that, and then flash a little bit more and be a better version in my mind of a Cam Thomas. Cam heats up a lot more in a hurry offensively, but like as far as a better shooter, bigger size and ability to play both ends, I like Dariq better. And I think if we're, again, I'm going a little bit into high school film, that's all we really saw from him being healthy. Like, I liked it. What I saw in college, I still think is a very solid pick for where he was selected. But that upside, if that is there, if he can recapture that and that foot didn't sap all of that athleticism from him, I'm definitely excited for that.
Yeah, the things you said about his play are definitely true. I think I'm just less optimistic about a guy who's had multiple surgeries on the same foot being able to capture the explosiveness that was part of what made him special, right? So that's my hesitation. I live in Durham, actually, and so Dariq is one of the few college players that I was able to watch a lot of just by proximity, right, to Duke. And I think he, with the understanding that the foot injury has to temper expectations, he just always left, I think, most observers a little bit cold here. Not to say he was bad by any means, but I just, if he can't get that foot right, then he's not going to have the athleticism needed to do the things that make him special. So it all just comes down to health. And for me, that's just a worrying thing to do with a first round pick, even if it's a late one.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And you have to take into account that because you're right about that foot and also the same one. But I agree. And I think that while I agree with that, I'm definitely excited to see what happens here with him. But
and they're not going to rush him. He's going to have a lot of time in the G League, I suspect. So
that's true.
Yeah, so we'll see.
And that's not bad.
No, not at all.
Yep. All right, so let's go from the draft, kind of transitioning more to free agency. Had some weird picks, some cool picks, just a lot of stuff happening. What was the most underrated free agency move to you?
All right, I got 3, and I will do them in order from sicko mode all the way up to maybe a little bit more mainstream.
Let's go.
All right, so first, Jordan Goodwin for Phoenix was not a free agent, to be fair, but he was part of the trade, right, that brought Bradley Beal over. And I just love Jordan Goodwin. I don't even know if he's going to end up making their final roster, to be honest. But to me, this is a team that literally doesn't have any point guards on the team. And he showed up me a lot in Washington. I swear I'm the only person who, outside of the DC area, who watched any Wizards games last year because nobody has even mentioned Jordan Goodwin. And I think he's a good defender on a team that desperately, desperately needs perimeter defense. I am going to be devastated if the Suns and Frank Vogel can't find this guy 12 minutes a game to come in and just kind of like muck things up and like run a functional pick and roll when necessary. And he's just like the exact kind of role player that I think Phoenix needs. So I love Jordan Goodwin. I really hope he gets an opportunity in Phoenix, because I think that he can help them in ways that pretty much nobody else on their roster can. So we'll see. I'm assuming you don't have tons of Jordan Goodwin thoughts, but I'll give you another guy to bounce off of.
Yeah, no, for sure. I watched a little bit of him. I did a little Wizards podcast for a bit. So I definitely agree with everything you said. And I also think that Frank Vogel, if there's any coach who will find defensive-minded players there, Frank Vogel will try to squeeze blood out of a turnip with the Lakers roster in 2021. I think he'll find a place for him.
Yep. No, that's exactly how I feel. So then moving up a notch is Gabe Vincent with the Lakers. I think is a beautiful player for that team. I suspect that he is going to end up taking most of D'Angelo Russell's playoff minutes once we come down to it, which I think is fine. Like, D'Angelo Russell is probably a better regular season player in the fact that he's going to go out and he'll score more points than Gabe Vincent, which is going to be important on the nights where Davis is injured or doesn't have it going, or where LeBron is just, for whatever reason, taking a step back. Like, last year was the first year I can remember where like LeBron noticeably had taken a step back, right? It had been a pretty gradual decline for a while, but last year was the first one where it's like, yep, this guy is definitely getting older, and he's not going to be able to bring it every single night. D'Angelo Russell can fill in that void a little bit, but in the playoffs, I think Gabe Vincent is a better fit for the team, and I think he's a better playoff player, period. He's a great point of attack defender. Even though he is small and he's not switchable in the traditional way, I think that he will fight really hard. Like, I don't think that he's a total walkover either when he gets switched onto bigger players. And I think his 3-point percentages are quite deceptive. He doesn't look like, based on last year, like a knockdown 3-point shooter. But the problem is that he can't shoot for anything off the dribble. Do not let this man do a pull-up 3-pointer. But catch and shoot, I believe he was over 40% last year. And I think he has a long history of being an excellent catch and shoot 3-point shooter, which is more important to me than like D'Angelo Russell's self-professed, creation skills or whatever. So I think Vincent is going to be a guy who doesn't make a huge impact in the regular season, but we end up singing his praises in the way that we did with, Rui Hachimura in the most recent playoffs.
No, I'm with you. I like coming from the Heat perspective that you bring. I definitely like that expert analysis there, especially on the shooting off the dribble. I did look at those numbers. I was like, oh, interesting. But I agree, like a better fit. And let's be real. Gabe Vincent is one of those small guards who plays so well alongside LeBron James, right?
Exactly.
Guys, heady, simple offensive reads, play decent defense for the position, can knock down an open three. They don't want you to do the ball. Now, mind you, that is different because traditionally, those are the guards who play best off LeBron James. But those LeBron James, not that LeBron James, right? We saw a guy like Austin Reeves who does more. I mean, Austin Reeves led the Lakers in postseason scoring in several games LeBron James was playing through. Mind you, LeBron James, torn foot tendon. That's a lot. But also, like you said, he looked out. He went through a whole quarter or first half without taking a shot or something. And like just very deferential, which, yeah, LeBron James can be that. Like, that's kind of the play he can. But I usually think dominance and you can't really stop him, and he makes the better basketball play. In this case, it's like, I don't got it, man. Like, do what you got to do. And Austin Reeves being a guy who's like a bigger positional player, can play on ball and can play off. I feel his transition to be more of the guard that will play best with LeBron in his twilight years of basketball player. But if we're going by regular season, that sort of thing, or playoffs where you hope you get old LeBron back, then you want a guy like Gabe Vincent, who's like a chip off the old block of the 2012 Mario Chalmers or, lesser extent Norris Cole or those type of players. So I'm with you on that for sure. I really only had one underrated move, and that was because it was a bunch of moves all into one. You kind of touched on a little bit. That was the Phoenix Suns bench.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Coming with what they, I want to get yours for sure. I think it remains to be seen what they look like moving forward. I'm really giving this more of a shout because of a fresher approach to this. We've seen these veteran-laden teams with these 3 stars in varying degrees of their basketball career all team up. And what does the team do? They go and say, okay, let's get all the former All-Stars from 10 years ago, and stock it up. We saw the Brooklyn Nets do it with Blake Griffin and, LaMarcus Aldridge, and I think they even tried during the pandemic, Jamal Crawford. You have these older guys in, right? We saw that with the Miami Heat back in the day. Literally the who's who of who was that back then, right? We saw the Lakers do in 2021, right? There's this propensity to just go with name guys. And hope that they can recapture the form they had 4 years ago when they were slipping then. The Phoenix Suns didn't really do that. They had one guy they did it with a little bit. That was Eric Gordon. Even then, 2 years, $6 million. I don't mind it. I mean, the guy does turn 35 in December. Do mind that a little bit. But I don't think his game's going to age terribly. He's a stocky guy. Never really was known for his quickness. Really strong for his position. Can kind of play up or down. Can space the floor from deep. Can also do some on-ball reps. I don't necessarily like the contract. I would have been much happier for 1 year as an overpay. But sure, right? Yuta Watanabe, 6'9", 3-point sniper. Like, he played very well alongside Durant. To get him for what you did, great. Keita Bates-Diop, I mean, if you watch him in San Antonio, I watched a little bit of that. He definitely looked better as a shooter. Defensively was really good. Like, I think it's legit. I don't think it was very high volume. So we'll see. Like, and maybe you won't have to have high volume in Phoenix too. You have 3 guys who are going to take a lot of shots. But, like, I did see him in San Antonio. I thought that was real. Chimezie Metu was pretty solid. Drew Eubanks had some time in San Antonio as well. Metu was in Sacramento. Both those guys had solid minutes for their position. And then Damian Lee and Josh Okogie were just holdovers. That brought something, whether it's shooting for Lee or defense for Okogie. So, like, do I like any of them individually? Maybe Utah. And even then, like, defensively, not super great, but he's a big guy who can shoot well, and I saw him play off Durant. I saw Keita Bates-Diop. You know, if you again, this is like a collection of basketball sickos kind of picks because we all saw them, and we know in those moments. Now, the difference is, in those moments, like, aside from Metu in Sacramento, and that's really about it, or maybe Lee and Okogie, like, these guys weren't really playing for, like, high stakes. You know what I mean? I mean, with Sacramento, we found that as we went along. But they were in, like, very specific minutes in these roles for teams that weren't really going anywhere fast. I mean, Gordon later on with the Clippers, of course. Utah at the beginning with the Nets. But seeing them now in a different situation, how they fit in, that's going to be intriguing. But I thought that they could have went a different way with the way they targeted the free agency. They didn't. I think given the cap constraints, they did a decent job of securing some depth with some intriguing positions.
Yeah, so first off, I love all of the players you mentioned. Like you said, it's for people who watch a lot of basketball like we do, obviously. A lot of these guys have kind of long been like teases where it feels like, you know, they're awesome players that never quite seem to get as many minutes as we want them to. But let me play devil's advocate a little bit, because I actually did have these guys as a little bit in the overrated off season, not because it was bad. It was very good. I just think that you read all these names off and it's like, oh yeah, love Watanabe. He's awesome. I love Chimezie Metu. Keita Bates-Diop, loved him. But suddenly you're like, wait a second. These are a lot of names for guys that are ninth men on a good team. And it makes the Phoenix Suns look super deep on paper because they're like entire back end of the roster, like all the way up to like their 14th, 15th man is made up of ninth men. So it's like, wow, these guys are so deep. They got so much depth. But that's not really playoff depth where you want 7 or 8 guys. And suddenly your 6th, 7th, 8th men are like ninth men, quote unquote, right? And you're like, oh, maybe this isn't as good as I'd thought. I'm still not 100% sure they've solved their 5th player issue. Gordon definitely could be it. Like Okogie will be it on some nights. But I don't feel great about that. And so I do want, like, I love all these players and I love that they went young instead of old. Like you said, there's potential for these guys to get better than they've been in the past. But I do just think that, like, as an aggregate, it does feel like they didn't really address what was, to me, their biggest issue, which is just like figuring out who that last starting guy or closing guy in some respects is going to be. So we'll see. Like I said, this is mostly devil's advocate because I did love it overall, but I can see how we look back at the end of next season and we're like, wow, we got a little bit too excited about a bunch of minimum level guys. Because at the end of the day, minimum level guys are minimum guys for a reason, right?
Very true. Very true. And I think that how they work together, you made a great point about playoff depth and how that will look. I can't argue that. We'll see. But you're right. Like, those guys don't really strike me as like, yeah, maybe let's do that. Let's kind of lump in this last question together because I do feel like it is sort of similar, which is, and we could really just kind of come down to one. It's like the most, I would say like the most, not even the most overrated signing, because like, yeah, there's a lot of talk about that, but let's say like the most clueless move and tie that in with like the worst offseason.
Sure.
Yeah, like the same category for like the worst of the 2023 offseason. There you go.
Yeah, I'm going to say Houston, the Houston Rockets.
Houston, we have a problem.
And, you know, I think I completely understand why they made all the decisions they did. The contract for Dylan Brooks looked pretty crazy, $86 million, which I actually said before the season I thought he was going to get an $80 million contract. I think that he is I think he's a better player than people think he is. They ended up having to overpay him because they whiffed on Brook Lopez through some fascinating cap room shenanigans we don't need to go into here. But the problem is they brought in Fred VanVleet. They brought in Dylan Brooks. They got a new coach in Udoka. And I think, you know, he is going to be an excellent on-court fit. I still have questions about bringing in a guy who's had some, let's say, salacious off-court behavior that maybe isn't like the kind of those aren't really maybe the questions you want to be bringing onto this franchise that already has a lot of, you know, kind of maturity issues, I think. But people are acting like Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks are like these, like, reliable old heads who are going to come in and set an order. And these are two guys who are pretty shot hungry on a team that is filled with like Chuck Happy, shoot first, shoot second, shoot third players. I feel kind of bad for Amen Thompson, who I think is, one of my favorite players in this draft. And he is not that kind of player, but like, he is not going to get the ball at all. He's just never going to touch it. And Brooks, we know, like basically got run out of Memphis for talking too much and shooting too much. And VanVleet is not a table-setting pass-first kind of point guard. Like, he is a good passer, but he shot under 40%, just like Brooks, on a very high volume. And I don't think that, like, he's going to come in and suddenly shoot 8 times a game and focus really hard on making sure Jalen Green gets to the right spots. So, like, I just don't love the fit on the court with Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, really. I think the one thing all those two guys and, Udoka have in common is that they are very willing to hold players accountable in the press and like talk shit about their own teammates, more or less. Sorry, excuse my French. Which there is some benefit to. there is some benefit to that for sure on a team that desperately needed accountability. But I don't know that is going to be as well received coming from other players as it is from the coach. And so while I love the coaching hire, I am concerned about Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks. The contracts, I think, are timed in such a way that hopefully they're not going to be too onerous down the road when Houston has to start extending some of their young guys. But I just don't think VanVleet and Brooks are good on-court fits with the players they had in terms of trying to figure out if those guys can really be something on a winning basketball team. No one's expecting the Rockets to really make the playoffs this year. I think they just want them to turn into a developing team instead of a bad team. And I am not convinced that Brooks and Fred VanVleet are going to be the kind of complementary pieces that will accelerate the growth of the young guys. I, in fact, think they may be active impediments.
No, I'm kind of with you there. I feel like they're just the right amount of, like you said, the word impediments to like slow up positions of key need for development for the Rockets. So definitely with you on that. But yeah, I just want to say I appreciate you taking your time here, coming on and talking.
Well, wait, who's your pick? I got time to hear your pick.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Okay. I totally forgot about me. The Blazers. Oh. And not because of it's weird because I love their draft move. Like they did a really good job of taking Scoot. Like I said, easy decision, right? 5 years, $160 million for Jeremy Grant. Was not a fan of that even before Lillard put in his trade request. Like that's a lot of money, and I get like you wanted to keep him and all that stuff, but this is a major overpay. In general, in my mind, for a guy who like at his best is, I would say, a really good second player, really more of a third offensive wise. Like I mean, he's shown a little bit more in Portland. I'd say I could talk myself into being like a second guy, but I feel like he's more like an ancillary offensive piece who on like a good night can really bring you, 28 to 30 points. But like for the most part, it's in that like 18 to 23 range, which is fine. But that's a lot of money for a guy who's also 29, and with Dame leaving, it's like, okay, great. That's he's probably your best player. That's not great. You're definitely gonna be tanking. And then the way is to go, oh, actually, no, we're trying to win. We're gonna be competitive. I don't know what universe you trade one of your franchise's best players of all time, and are better positioned to win. Alongside a contract that's more of an albatross, especially when you could easily just embrace the rebuild right now. And you have guys like Shaedon Sharpe who can move into that 3. You have guys like Anthony Simons who you either see what they have, they're young enough they can fit with this young team, or you could trade him. Obviously Scoot Henderson, Nasir Little, like you have pieces here that you can, at this point, start the deconstruction. Let's go move Yusuf Nurkic as well. Like, let's break it down. But for them not to do that, it's really, I mean, the catalyst of why they had the worst offseason was the contract for Grant for me, but ultimately it's just the direction they're going with. Like, there's no way in my mind you make a trade for Lillard that puts you into playing contention. I think you were still solidly in that 12 to 15 range. And so if you have that lack of foresight and insight of your own team and the intel you have, I can't grade you highly with a good conscience.
That's fair. It's hard for me to get too worked up, I'd say, about Jeremy Grant in it by itself. Like it's a lot of money. He's still a good player. He's going to have trade value down the road. And I think they're probably going to end up flipping him. I still don't love the Blazers offseason because I just feel like, to your point, there's other things they could have done and didn't do, right? Like Nurkic is still there. They lost Drew Eubanks, who I think was actually a pretty valuable, role player for them. I would have liked to have seen them keep him. Like having a functional big man is so important for a young point guard like Scoot. And, Nurkic is I don't think Nurkic is that much better than Eubanks, and Nurkic is getting paid much more handsomely, and Eubanks is gone now. Right. So I don't know. I agree 100%. Like they got a lot of young guys that need to see what they can do. And it feels like they still have some veterans on the roster. And you want some veterans, but you don't want the ones that are kind of going back to like what we were saying about Houston, where like Grant's not going to be table setting for any guys, right? Like he's out there. Had a pretty efficient scoring season last year, but he is a scorer first and foremost on offense. And yeah, I don't know. Portland still, even after the trade, feels like they may be lacking a little bit of direction, or it could just be that, they're waiting to see if they can get better deals closer to the trade deadline, which happens in a lot of cases. So it might just be that we're being a little too eager beavers over here, and we need to give them some time to fully realize their plan.
There it is. You're right. Well, listen, I will say this, Mike. It was a good plan to have you on. Transition king. I love it. Thank you so much for your time and just talking this offseason with me. I know we could have gone on an easy 35, 40 minutes more. And you know what? That just gives more room for another future pod with you as a guest. So definitely want to thank you. And I want you to share with the folks where they can find you. You put out good work on your own accord, just even despite working with Basketball Intelligence, where we shout out other people's fine work. But you put out great content. I think it's time for people to hear.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So find me at bball is poetry on Twitter, which is where I'll link to most of my work. Most of my written work is done on my own website, so basketballpoetry.com. Check that out. Of course, go to basketballintelligence.net to get your daily newsletter linking to the best stories of the day. So just hopefully, you'll like what you see.
There we go. I'm sure y'all will. I know I've definitely enjoyed it. So thank you again, sir. Really appreciate that. Listen, y'all can find me on Twitter at Corban NBA if y'all are so inclined. Definitely appreciate that. Also, any stuff on Basketball Intelligence, happy to work with Mike and Ray and just the fine folks there. It's a really good squad as well. I will start having more work out for Swish Theory coming soon. So definitely stay tuned for that. Some more front office history retrospectives. I think we're starting with the Phil Jackson Knicks, so that should be fun to dive back into.
Nice.
And yeah, that'll be great. And then I'm also, in fact, definitely going to talk about Mike on this, but might as well shout out here. Coming up in about 2 weeks, I'm going to start my first NBA draft retrospective. We're going back 30 years. So we're going from 93 to now, which is, I know, very quick, immediate reaction, but we're going to look back on the draft, some of what we liked, what we didn't like, players that we saw that, confusing fits and whatnot, and then do a little fun exercise where we draft our best little 10-man rotation out the draft. Well, really 8-man rotation out the draft as our own little individual team. So it should be fun. But yeah, we'll go from 93 to 2023. It should be a lot of fun for the history buffs, for the NBA sickos as we are, and all of that. So excited to get started with that. But listen, y'all, this has been great. Definitely check us out. Like I said, Ramble, roster reconstruction. Check out Mike's work as well at bball is poetry. But until next time, y'all, for Mike, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty, and I'll talk to y'all real soon. All right, y'all.